Okay, welcome back. This is going to be your podcast on Protists, podcast 8.3. We already talked to you guys about the kingdom Bacteria, and today we're going to be talking to you about kingdom Protista. So, let's get started. There's some similarities and differences within the Protist kingdom itself. All are going to be eukaryotes. Remember, eukaryotes are going to be the ones that have a nucleus. They mostly live in moist surroundings. They can be either unicellular or multicellular. As far as forms of getting food, they can be autotrophic, heterotrophic, or both in the same organism. And some can move and others cannot. Remember, if they are able to move, then they are called motile. If they cannot move on their own, then they are considered sessile.
Okay, there are three categories of protist. We have the animal-like protist, the fungus-like protist, and the plant-like protist. We'll be going into each of these in more detail. The animal-like protists are also known as protozoans. They are unicellular heterotrophs. So remember, heterotrophs do have to consume their food from outside sources. They're not able to make their own food. There are four groups of these animal-like protists, and they're based on how they're able to move. So there's the flagella with the tail-like structures that you've seen before. They can also move by cilia, which is the hair-like structures on the outside of the organisms, or by pseudopods, which you can see these structures here that are extending out from the organism. The last category would be the other group that would move by something else besides these three. Malaria, you can see here, is found in red blood cells. Now, this is an example of an animal-like protist.
Okay, so protozoans with pseudopods. Pseudopods are also called false feet. Pseudo would be false. Pod is the feet part of that word. The cell membrane pushes in one direction, and then what happens is the cytoplasm within that organism is going to flow into the bulge that has been created by that pushing in that direction. And then what it does is it allows the protozoan to move, dragging the rest of the cell or the rest of the body behind it. And here's just an example. This is an amoeba pseudopodia. Okay, so this is the entire organism here, and then these finger-like projections go out, and then you can see that the cytoplasm moves into them, and then it all moves in that direction, dragging the rest of it behind it. You'll see it here as well. Okay, so here's an example of how the pseudopods move. It's going to be moving in this direction, so this projection here is going to become bigger right there. The cytoplasm is going to flow into that area, and then it's going to drag the rest of the body along with it and move in that general direction. What it can do also is it can form two pseudopods to surround and trap food. Because remember, we said that they are going to be autotrophic, heterotrophic, or both. If they're heterotrophic, then they're getting their food by eating other sources of food. So it's going to form a food vacuole that will break down that food in the cytoplasm that has been pinched into the organism itself. So here we have our amoeba or our animal-like protozoan. The nucleus is here in the center like usual. Here's a food source right here. These projections are going to go out, the pseudopodia, they're going to go around it, pinch it off, and then they're going to bring it into this food vacuole right here where chemicals are going to help break it down to be a food source. Here's just a microscopic image of the same thing. Another microscopic image.
Okay, pseudopods can reproduce by binary fission just like bacteria. They do have a contractile vacuole which collects extra water and expels it from the cell. So it does thin cell membrane that has no definite shape. You saw in all the pictures you've seen of these pseudopods, they have very odd shapes. An example would be the pseudopod amoeba. Protozoans with cilia. Remember, cilia are those hair-like structures. They do help organisms move, get food, and sense the environment around them. These protozoans actually have two nuclei. One nuclei controls its everyday functions. The other is used for reproduction. And this reproduction is either asexually through binary fission. Remember, that's the division of the cell or organism. And the other would be the sexual reproduction, which is conjugation. That's whenever it creates a tube between another organism in order to pass on that genetic material. The way that these protozoans with cilia get their food is from these oral grooves that are lined with cilia. So here in this white section of this protozoan, there is a oral groove. What happens is it brings in water that contains food into a food vacuole, which is at the bottom of that oral groove, in order to collect it. An example of a protozoan with cilia is Paramecium. Here's another picture of the protozoan with cilia. Okay, here's a diagram. You can see that contractile vacuole here. You can see the cilia on the outside, the hair-like structure. You can see the oral groove here. It is still lined with the cilia. Remember, it brings in water, which contains food. It will be collected here in that food vacuole. There's also an anal pore here to dispose of waste. Here's a microscopic view of these protozoans with cilia.
Okay, and then there's also protozoans with flagella. These organisms are called zooflagellates or zooflagellates. They use a long whip-like part called the flagella to move, and they usually live inside other organisms. So here's an example of one of those. It's Trichomonas fetus, which is a cow disease. So this is kind of showing you right here in the center that these are the actual protozoans with the flagellum. But this would have been taken in like the gut of a cow. This is another example. It's Trichomonas vaginalis. This is actually an STD. This is a microscopic image of what that STD looks like. Okay, so then we also have fungus-like protists. So remember, this is our second type of protist. We had animal-like. This is the second type. It's fungus-like protists. They're going to be both like animals and like plants. The way that they're like animals is they are heterotrophs, so they consume others for their energy. But like plants, they have a cell wall. They reproduce by something called spores, which are these tiny cells that can grow into a new organism. They are not in the fungi kingdom itself because they can move at one point in their lives. And remember, fungus does not. It would be considered sessile. An example of what a fungus-like protist would be mildew. You've seen mildew before on like food that's gone bad in the fridge. Here's another picture of a fungus-like protist, and another one. This is a microscopic image of it, and another one just in natural habitat. This one's on a bunch of grapes, a powdery mildew grape. So again, this is something that you could see in your own refrigerator.
Okay, our third type is the plant-like protists. These are better known as algae. They are autotrophic, meaning they are able to produce their own food. Their size varies. They can be unicellular or they can be very large. They do contain different pigments so that they come in different colors. A lot of algae is named due to their colors, such as red algae, green algae. Euglena is actually a special type of algae. When there is no sunlight, they actually can become heterotrophic. So here you can see they're both autotrophic and heterotrophic. It's able to adapt when there's no sunlight in order to become heterotrophic and consume other organisms as food. Here's just a microscopic view. And here is one more.
Okay, so that brings us to the conclusion on our Protist podcast. It's a little bit shorter than the others, so I'm sure that you enjoyed that. Make sure that you have your notes on it. If you don't, go back and jot some stuff down, jot some questions down that you might have for us, and we'll see you in class.